Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to the first Album of the Week video of the new year. This is episode number 187. Today, I will be taking a dive into the classic 1973 debut from Aerosmith. The album where everything began for the self-proclaimed bad boys from Boston. And since this past Thursday, it's reached its 50th anniversary. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? So the story of this album begins as this. In 1972, after creating a partnership with Frank Connolly, David Krebs, and Steve Leber, they went and invited members of two record labels. Those labels were Atlantic and Columbia. They were invited to Maxis, Kansas City, where Aerosmith was performing at. Clive Davis of Columbia was impressed with the band that night, and in the summer of 1972, Aerosmith signed their very first record contract with Columbia Records, a partnership that would last for 10 years. The group ended up recording their debut album at Intermedia Studios on 331 Newbury Street in Boston, Massachusetts in October of 1972 with record producer Adrian Barber. And the album would soon after be released on January 5th of 1973. So here we are, folks. Here we are at the album itself. So the album here consists of 8 tracks and clocks in at the length of 35 minutes and 48 seconds. So these 8 tracks are, beginning with Make It, Somebody, Dream On, One Way Street, Mama Ken, Write Me. Actually, it's actually fully titled as Write Me a Letter, but on most of some of these, depending on certain releases, especially here I've got the 1993 CD reissue, it's just titled as Write Me. Then of course we get into Moving Out, and then finally ending with their cover of Rufus Thomas's Walking the Dog. So there you go, folks. There's your 8 tracks. So where do I begin here? Well, how about I begin with how I got into Aerosmith? My introduction begins with the 1993 album Get a Grip. Obviously, my little time frame, whatever, my memory is that obviously had to be during the evening or something, or actually afternoon, I think, right before my dad actually coming home from work. My mom decided to actually put on Get a Grip. That was my very first time ever listening to Aerosmith, and then soon after, I then discovered the Permanent Vacation album. And I don't know, it's kind of tough which album I've heard first, though, to be honest. There are times where I actually remember my mom putting on Permanent Vacation, but then there are times where I remember her putting on Get a Grip, but I can't really quite seem to put the pieces together, which came first. But all I know is that those were my first 2 albums ever of, just listening to Aerosmith. And those were again, the 2 albums that introduced me to them. I ate up those albums so much till my dad went into Tower Records one day, obviously taking his car to get an oil change, and since where the place or where he normally obviously was a Hyundai, if you actually remember that car company. down, I think, in Blackstone here in Fresno. Across the way was, of course, what was Tower Records and now what used to have been Rasputin. So he immediately, walked over across the street there to Tower Records and picked up a copy of their classic 1976 album, Rocks. And the rest is history. The Rocks album completely blew me away. Compared to the more polished sounds of Get a Grip and Permanent Vacation, Rocks sounded raw, even heavy, filled with attitude that made me love their early period so much more than what they were putting out at the time. So I was craving more, So I was craving more of that early sound that it eventually led to me picking up Get Your Wings from Circuit City. Remember that place? And I devoured that album till I memorized each note. I might be over-exaggerating that a little bit, but I was playing that album so much, even on my way of, my mom or whatever taking me to school and such. I would be listening to Get Your Wings just as a way to kind of keep me occupied during that drive a little bit, from where I was living at the time, at the condo, whatever, in Palm Lakes here in Clovis, and then all the way to the school where my grandmother used to live at. But yeah, it was just so much great memories there. But again, Get Your Wings was just one of those albums that just kept me occupied, especially just my ears occupied and everything. And so just the memories are endlessly there. Still, as much as I was loving those 70s era albums, there still was more from that period of that band that needed to be discovered. However, it wasn't till 2016 when I would add Toys in the Attic into the collection, even though my brother had once borrowed it from the library here in Fresno, and he at least had burned a copy, and sent it to me when I was pretty much up living in Susanville at the time. And those were just my original times of listening to Toys in the Attic. And I also need to mention too that even prior to that, I had gotten, that Guitar Hero Aerosmith game, as a way to probably cash in on them. But that game too also pretty much introduced me to some other sort of early Aerosmith stuff. And again, it was just another great sort of gateway into really kind of diving into the early period, that more raw, that more youthful period again of Aerosmith. Then soon after, it would be finally A Rock and a Hard Place, and then Night in the Ruts. Still, the debut was eluding me. Finally, in 2019, I would score a copy of the band's 1973 debut, and so I was finally able to hear what the band sounded like on their debut. For years, all I really heard was Dream On and Rat's cover of Walkin' the Dog. Again, it's not really a Aerosmith song, but a song that they somewhat popularized because of this debut album. So compared to everything that I've listened to from Aerosmith that they've released in the 70s, their debut here is even more raw. It's much more bluesy too, but also quite underdeveloped. Again, it's not quite realized as it would begin on their follow-up record, Get Your Wings, that also could be due to the production, which Joey Perry once stated here, our producer was practically useless. He had little input. When I heard the playback, I kept thinking, we're better than this. We should sound better than this. We're being recorded wrong. We sound fucking flat. But because I lacked the studio chops to prescribe a remedy, I kept quiet. It pained me, though, that my guitar was not cutting through. There's magic on it, but just not the magic that I had envisioned. But that's not to say the album is shit, okay? Again, I feel where he's coming from, but really, it's quite a good British-influenced American heavy blues rock album. Again, in the vein of something like the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Free, and of course the Yardbirds. Again, it's just turned up to 11 here. Not as much as on the subsequent albums, but still loud enough to get the point across. As for the songs themselves, as much as Dream On gets the attention here, there is more to this album than just Dream On. I dig the opening track, Make It, which has that cool groove to it. The Aerosmith of later is kind of creeping in on this track, but again, it's still kind of laid back in that term. However, there are other cool ones for me on here, like the 7-minute blues epic, One Way Street, and Moving Out. But the beginning of that classic Aerosmith vibe is actually felt on Mamakin, a song Guns N' Roses would soon cover. I mean later, whatever, for the, was it Love Like a Suicide EP? It's a fun, energetic rocker that's got that smart-ass, streetwise attitude that Aerosmith would expand onto their later albums that would solidify them. Their cover of the Rufus Thomas track here, Walking the Dog, is another great highlight that Aerosmith, of course, made their own. Again, they really did a pretty good job making the sound as if it was their own, and I think it's one of those many reasons why Rat would soon, later on their 1983 EP would cover that track. So, all in all, it was a solid start for the band, but better albums would soon come, starting in 1974, but I'll leave things at that. So the album here has reached its 50th anniversary. So for those who have fond memories of listening to this album, or not so fond memories, whether they be positive or negative, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you have never listened to this debut from Aerosmith, and you're thinking about where to start, I'd say start with either Toys in the Attic and Rocks. Then make your way backwards, and then forwards. So there you go. Hope all of you enjoyed this episode here. And there will definitely be more anniversary-themed episodes like this coming, again, as soon as possible within the weeks to come. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I am out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone, and I hope all of you had a nice, happy new year. Take care.